So, as you guys know if you've ever watched a video on this channel before, I'm a huge fan of One Piece, and that pertains to pretty much any aspect of it. I think that should be pretty clear, since we just finished a two-part series where I talked about all of the unique martial arts in the series, but there are still more things when it comes to fighting that we could talk about. There are still subsets of devil fruits that we haven't talked about, and hockey seemingly evolves with every new chapter, but I want to go over another more fun and interesting thing that makes the fights more unique. So, a big aspect of the fights in One Piece are the weapons that people use, and none of the weapons that are showcased in One Piece are more prominent than swords. Swords and the swordsmen that wield them have been an integral part of the One Piece story since the very first arc, so it only makes sense that these swordsmen have unique ways of utilizing their swords. And these different swordsmanship styles are exactly what we're here to talk about today, as today we're here to talk about the absurdity of One Piece swordsmanship styles. I could also definitely make a video about One Piece swords in the future, since a ton of them have some really interesting lore, but there's just so much to talk about when it comes to this series that we're gonna have videos coming for quite a long time. With that being said, we have quite a few swordsmanship styles to talk about today, seeing as there are a lot of different users, so I think it's time to just hop right into things. Three Sword Style is a unique style of triple wielding swordsmanship where the practitioner wields three katanas, one in each hand and the third in the mouth. There are many different techniques for this sword style, including direct hit attacks, onigiri, and compressed air projectile attacks, Haku Hachi Pound Ho. Zoro is the world-famous swordsman of the Straw Hat Pirates who created this style, using his original two-sword style as the basis of most of Three Sword Style's techniques, which also incorporates dual wielding. During the Thriller Bark arc, Jigoro, the zombie given Zoro's shadow, was also capable of this sword style due to Gekko Moria's Kage Kage no Mi powers. This is easily the most iconic swordsmanship style in the entire series, so it honestly would have felt wrong if I started this video off by talking about anything else. I knew from the very beginning when Zoro said that all three of the swords that Luffy stole belonged to him that we were in for a treat, and the three sword style has been present in some of the best fights in the entire series. It only makes sense that it's one of the most iconic swordsmanship styles, since Zoro is one of the most iconic characters, and you guys know that I have to talk about a few of the techniques. Firstly are the very many different versions of his onigiri attack, starting with the very first one that we got to see all the way back in chapter 17 when he used it to defeat Kabaji. This is Zoro's signature technique, and it's a three-way simultaneous slashing attack. Zoro crosses his two swords across his chest and places the blade in his mouth horizontally behind them. Zoro then approaches the target, usually at high speed, and cuts through by swinging the swords across his chest, resulting in a descending diagonal crossing slash from both swords, while the mouth blade performs a horizontal cut from either the left or right, depending on which side of his mouth he positioned the sword's main blade at. This is the attack that's synonymous with Zoro's character, since it's his signature attack, and the finishing pose that he hits with it every time goes pretty hard. It's pretty much impossible to think of Zoro and not think about this attack, and I believe that that's the very reason that it has so many different variations. The first one of these that we need to talk about is called Yaki Onigiri, and this translates to Flaming Onigiri. This is simply a version of onigiri where Zoro's swords are on fire, and should the attack connect, the opponent will also be set on fire. This was first used during the Little Garden arc when Zoro saved Usopp from Mr. 5, and the only downside of this attack is that Zoro also gets burnt while using it. With that being said, this is the same guy that was willing to cut his own feet off in order to save himself from Mr. 3's wax statue, so it only makes sense that he doesn't care about a little burning. Another version of the onigiri is called the Enbima Yonizu Onigiri, and that translates to Charming Demon Sleepless Night Onigiri. This is a stronger version of onigiri where the swords are twisted during the slash for added force, resulting in this attack striking multiple opponents instead of one. This was first seen being used against several marines in the Enies Lobby courthouse, and during its use, Zoro generated a steam which made his swords look like they were bending. This was another moment in the earlier part of the One Piece story where people thought that Zoro could actually be the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates, but once again, that only makes sense given the way that he acts and the crazy amount of power that he has. The anime adding a literal phantom behind him while he does this attack also only adds to his aura, but Zoro easily has some of the most aura in all of One Piece, so what's a little bit more? Then we've got another variation that Zoro developed during the time skip called Rengoku Onigiri, which translates to Purgatory Onigiri. This is a much stronger version of onigiri where Zoro's eyes flash red and a purple aura, green after obtaining Enma, surrounds his entire body while his swords are infused with armament haki. Haki. He then blitzes the opponent at high speeds, usually breaking apart the ground that he propelled himself off of. The effect of this attack leaves an X-shaped stream of blood and generates a powerful shockwave that destroys the surroundings. This has been Zoro's signature attack during the post-time skip material, and we've seen him use it to end a ton of fights, but the first time that we get to see it is during the Fishman Island arc. He uses it to defeat the swordsman that uses 8 swords, Hyozu, and it was even more impressive because the guy was hyped up on energy steroids when he defeated him. Energy steroids are some of the most interesting things in the One Piece story because of their terrible side effects, but I could see them coming back if a future enemy is desperate enough. And with that, you'd think that we'd be done talking about onigiris, but we aren't done quite yet, as there's just one more. This is used in Zoro's King of Hell form, and it's a version of Rengoku Onigiri where Zoro infuses both Conqueror's and Armament Haki, making the strength and range of the attack much greater. The funniest thing about this attack is that we know for a fact that it's one of his strongest, even though he didn't hit King with it and instead destroyed a boulder with it. With that being said, we all know that it's his most powerful version of Onigiri, solely because of the fact that it's also infused with Conqueror's Haki, which is only getting stronger and stronger. And with that, you'd think that we'd be done talking about 3 sword style, but that isn't the case, because I've got one more technique that I want to focus on. This is because it seems like it's Zoro's ultimate technique, based on the fact that it was the last move that he pulled out against Mihawk during the Baratie arc, and that technique is called Sontoryu Ogi Sanzen Sakai. This translates to 3 sword style secret skill, 3000 worlds, and it's honestly a pretty devastating technique. In this technique, Zoro holds 2 of his swords at an angle against each other and rotates them rapidly while running towards his opponent to create momentum, and he then slices the foe up with full speed and power with all 3 swords at once. According to the name of this attack, it's the ultimate and strongest technique of 3 sword style, but we didn't see it used successfully until the Thriller Bark arc where Zoro used it against Oars. We've only seen this attack a few times, but almost every time that Zoro uses it after the first time, it's effective, and that includes after the time skip. There's even a scene in One Piece Stampede where he uses it to cut a meteor that Fujitora summons, so if you didn't think that it was already powerful, it can cut rocks from space. It's also got multiple versions like Onigiri, but just like that one, most of them just exist because of the fact that Zoro learned how to use Haki during the time skip, so they're the same attack, just with Haki infused into them. This is definitely the swordsmanship style that we'll be talking about for the longest in this video, but that only makes sense since it's used by one of the most iconic characters in the entire series. 4 sword style is an unorthodox style used by Kaku, where he wields 2 swords with his hands and performs rank Yaku slashes with his legs. Given the nature of rank Yaku, however, this means that while Kaku can attack with 4 blades, he's left with only 2 that can defend and block attacks. This means that Kaku can only maintain 4 sword style if he's in control of the fight. If forced on the defensive, as seen at the beginning of his fight with Zoro, he can only defend with 2 swords. His Giraffe Devil Fruit does make it easier for him to use the style, however, as when he's transformed, his long neck also serves as a whip of sort, which he functions somewhat like a blade. Now, while Kaku has appeared more than once at this point, he only uses his sword style in his first fight against Zoro, so that's where all the techniques that we'll be talking about are from. There are also only 2 techniques that I want to talk about when it comes to this sword style, and the first one is called Rankyaku Hakurai. This translates to Tempest Kick White Thunder, and it's a much more powerful form of Rankyaku that's used by both legs, and it appears to cut the air in a larger area. I felt like it was necessary to talk about it here because this is Kaku's form of a ranged sword attack, something that every single competent swordsman in the One Piece world has. Seeing a slashing attack fly through the sky for the first time is something that really catches you off guard, but after a while it just makes sense and really fits. Kaku is also easily one of the best swordsmen in the world because of his standing and how powerful he is, and his razor close fight against Zoro was an easy indication of that. And the other technique that I want to talk about is called Rankyaku Amanedachi, and this translates to Tempest Kick Sky Slicer. Used in half giraffe form, he spins around quickly in a circle while standing on one hand, using his elongated neck to gain extra momentum and spin faster, and then performs Rankyaku with both legs to create a circle-shaped Rankyaku which radiates outward. This attack was so powerful that it cut through the outer walls of the Tower of Justice axis in all directions, and definitely would have killed Zoro if it landed. I think that this attack is so memorable because of the buildup that it was given before Kaku fired it off in the anime. The swelling music, as well as the way that Kaku talks about it, actually makes you a little concerned for Zoro. 4 sword style is a little unique when it comes to the sword styles in One Piece, solely because it uses another fighting style to make it function, and the character that uses it really likes giraffes. 6 sword style is a fighting style used by Hachi, an octopus fishman who has 6 arms available to wield swords. In addition to incorporating a large number of blades, each sword is extremely heavy and allows Hachi to easily overpower most opponents. Each of his swords also weigh 300 kilograms because of his enhanced strength as a fishman, so in essence, this is a sword fighting technique that focuses on the strength of the user. Hachi is another character where even though we have seen him multiple times at this point, we've only seen him fight once, so all the techniques that we'll be talking about today come from the Arlong Park arc. I do want to talk about Hachi in the Fishman Island arc a little bit first though, because I thought that his inclusion, or rather lack thereof, was pretty interesting. After the Saboti arc, it kinda seemed like seeing Hachi again would be really important to the Straw Hats when they went to Fishman Island, but he kinda just got hurt towards the beginning of the arc and then gets sidelined until the end where he sees them off with everybody else. I don't really know what I was expecting from him, and he may have actually appeared more than I remembered, but I just feel like he should have appeared more and had more interactions with the Straw Hats during that arc. Anyway, getting back to 6 sword style, there are 2 techniques that I want to talk about regarding it, and the first one is called Rokutoru Ogi Rokuto no Waltz. Following another attack that I don't want to talk about, Hachi spins all 6 swords over his head like a fan blade to shred a descending opponent to pieces. This is another sword attack that I felt like talking about because of how powerful it seems, as you definitely have to do something pretty insane to not get shredded by it. Luckily for us, and for Zoro, he does do some crazy shit in order to counter it, and even manages to cut Hachi as he rotates through the attack. Zoro doing this while the wound that he received from Mihawk is still pretty fresh is honestly one of the craziest endurance and durability feats that Zoro has in the entire series, and it's honestly surprising that it happens this early on. Now the second and final technique that I want to talk about when it comes to 6 sword style is called Takusubo no Kame, which translates to octopus pot stance. In this technique, Hachi positions all of his swords together in front of him and arranges them in a circular array over his chest to block an attack. We get to see this attack in action a grand total of 2 times, and we get to see what happens when it works, and what happens when it doesn't work. When it works, Hachi breaks his opponent's stance, leaving them wide open for an attack, with the one that he uses on Zoro being a body slam that sends him flying into the air. That's the attack that I didn't want to talk about before the waltz of the 6 swords, and seeing Zoro eat this attack shortly after his fight with Mihawk was yet another pretty insane feat. Well, he tries to use it again after Zoro counters his attack, but it doesn't work this time, and Zoro breaks all 6 of his swords for Hachi even daring to believe that the same attack would work on him twice. Shortly after this, Zoro defeats Hachi with the first Tatsumaki that we get to see in the entire series, and the Arlong pirates are slowly losing officers in a fight that they didn't think that they had a chance of losing. Just like a lot of the sword styles that we'll be talking about today, 6 sword style was interesting for the fight that it appeared in, but we haven't seen it since, and that's a little sad. 8 sword style is a fighting style used by Hyozu, an octopus fishman, using all of his limbs to hold 1 sword each, and with this style, Hyozu can cut many targets in different areas simultaneously. Not only can this guy wield 8 swords at a time, he can also coat the swords in his blue ring octopus venom to kill opponents with his attacks, and becomes powerful enough to cut through iron after overdosing on energy steroids. Now in all honesty, this isn't that impressive, since Zoro kinda does the same thing during the Alabasta arc, but Hody Jones and his crew were really just there to show us how strong the Straw Hats got after their training during the time skip. Now we've only seen Hyozu in the Fishman Island arc, so we've only seen 2 of his techniques, meaning that I guess I can talk about both of them. The first one that we need to talk about is called Chidori Ashi Hash, and this translates to Tottering Hash. In this technique, Hyozu swings his 8 swords against his opponents, 1 with each tentacle and 2 in his hands. This was first used when he was drunk and under the influence of energy steroids, which led him to be strong enough to slash through the new Fishman Pirates member members and cut through the Iron Shell squad's shields with ease. In all honesty, this is just a super reckless attack that completely relies on Hyozu's strength, but we knew that he would fight like this, as even Hachi himself said that he was the second strongest swordsman in all of Fishman Island during the Arlong Park arc. If the second strongest swordsman fights extremely recklessly, then there's no reason that the strongest swordsman wouldn't, and that's exactly what we see from Hyozu during the Fishman Island arc. Now the second and final technique that we need to talk about is called Modoku no Ken, which translates to poison blades. In this attack, Hyozu pulls out 8 swords that are coated with his deadly blue ring octopus venom, and this was first used against Zoro when his original 8 swords were destroyed. The idea of Hyozu just having 8 extra swords to pull out of nowhere is pretty damn hilarious, and the fact that they're coated in poison only makes it funnier. If he didn't produce the poison himself, then he would definitely kill himself with his own swords, and that's another thing that would be really funny. Hyozu is a character that's kind of an afterthought, even though he's an officer of the New Fishmen Pirates, but once again, the New Fishmen Pirates were really just here to show us how powerful the Straw Hats became during the time skip. 9 sword style is a highly unusual style used by Zoro in rare instances. Using spirit projection abilities of unclear origin, he generates 2 apparitions of himself on either side, both of which wield 3 swords. The attacks he performs with this style can unleash simultaneous 9-fold cuts on opponents. This style first appeared during the NE's lobby arc when he used it to defeat Kaku, and people immediately knew to be extremely hyped whenever it appeared. In fact, people theorized about when it would return post-time skip, and it finally did during the Wano arc when he used it to give Kaido a brand new scar. The craziest thing is that he developed this sometime before the time skip, but he didn't use it in his fight against Mihawk, so I'm assuming that he came up with it while traveling with the Straw Hats. Now that only makes sense, since a lot of the Straw Hats came up with their NE's lobby power-ups on the fly, but Zoro's just feels a little bit different since he, you know, spawns in some brand new heads, arms, and swords for himself. With that being said, there are actually 3 times that he's used this style in the story so far, as I forgot that he used it against the Pacifista during Saboti, but trust me, it was just as cool there as well. With that being said, just like every other sword style, we're going to talk about 2 of his techniques here, with the first being called Kiki Kyu Toryu Ashura. This translates to Demon Aura 9 sword style Ashura, and this is the basis for 9 sword style. Zoro, with Wado Ichimonji in his mouth and his other 2 blades held out in front of him, creates an illusion born of his spirit according to Kaku. To onlookers, it appears as if Zoro gains an additional pair of heads and 4 more arms, all wielding duplicates of his swords, each appearing twice more for 9 swords total. At the same time, an indistinct 6-armed Asura-like silhouette forms behind Zoro, the same entity he comes to resemble, described by Kaku as a 3-faced, 6-armed demon god. You just know that some shit is about to go down when you see this form, and it's also clear that this form takes a lot out of Zoro when it comes to stamina. Whenever he uses it, he can only ever really get 1 attack out of it, but that 1 attack is extremely devastating and either wins him the fight or does a significant amount of damage. With that being said, we're going to talk about the second technique that I want to talk about, which is called Ashura Bake Moja no Tawamure. This translates to Asura Blades Drawn Dead Man's Game, and in this technique, Zoro holds Enma out horizontally in his right hand, his other swords in his left hand and mouth as usual, and enters his Ashura state with the silhouette behind him clasping 2 of its 6 hands. Amid this, Haki begins emanating from him as he hardens his swords using armament Haki. He then readies his swords and moves past his opponents in a flash while cutting them with incredible force. This attack was first used on Kaido while the latter was in his human dragon form, and was successful in inflicting a deep, bloody gash across Kaido's torso. This was the attack that was used in the long-awaited return of this form, and I clearly remember the reaction to this moment when it went down. The beginning of the rooftop battle was easily some of the most hyped times to be a One Piece fan, and seeing Zoro do the same thing to Kaido that Oden did all those years ago was just another big moment that's honestly unforgettable. Foxfire style is a style style which the swordsman can generate fire from their sword, as well as cut through fire. It's used by both Kinemon and Zoro, the latter of whom learned it from watching the former. This ability allows Kinemon to cut through flames and explosions while completely protecting himself from harm, giving it a strong defensive use. For offense, the generated fire enhances Kinemon's regular attacks and is useful against creatures susceptible to heat. Zoro then started to use it after seeing Kinemon use it like we've already discussed, so he used it to cut Prometheus in half and started combining it with his own techniques. With that being said, since there are two characters that have used this swordsmanship style, we're going to talk about two techniques, one from Kinemon and one from Zoro. The first technique that we're going to talk about belongs to Kinemon, and it's called Homurasaki. This translates to flame rend or blaze slice, and in this attack, Kinemon slashes his sword to slice an incoming fire attack. This was first used to cut through an explosion caused by Smiley, and was first named when slicing through the flame breath of one of Vegapunk's dragons. This is the basis around the entire Foxfire style, and every time that we see it in use is pretty damn cool, but that only makes sense since the user is literally cutting through fire. This attack would also be more useful than it would seem in the One Piece world, since there are so many attacks that include fire, even from characters that you wouldn't expect to have fire powers. And now when it comes to Zoro's technique, he uses a technique called Homurasaki Rokudo no Suji. This translates to flame rend crossing the 6 paths, and while using 3 sword styles Rokudo no Suji and Homurasaki together, Zoro continuously cuts flames into several small pieces within seconds. This was the attack that was first used against Prometheus, rendering him weakened for a considerable amount of time by increasing the effort it needed to reform. Seeing Zoro be able to use another swordsman's sword style only shows him as a greater master swordsman than we thought before, and just like the development of the other Straw Hats, it makes me extremely happy. Now I doubt that he'll be using this style in something like his final battle against Mihawk, but it was something that he gained on his journey, so I'm sure that it'll help him in some sort of way. Kappa style is a style utilized by the samurai Kawamatsu, and its attacks center around brute force and circular motion. According to Kawamatsu, fighting against the Kappa style is like trying to swim against raging waters, which makes full use of his fishman's strength to inflict powerful blows. When wielding his Sotomuso, Kawamatsu was able to blow away several men charging against him, taking them down in a single blow. Kappa style truly is really cool, but that only makes sense since Kawamatsu is quite literally a frog samurai, and there's no world where that isn't cool. With that being said, we've got some techniques to go over, and the first technique that I want to talk about is called Minamugawa, which translates to River of Retribution. In this technique, Kawamatsu lunges towards his opponents and quickly cuts them down. It was first used against several Beast Pirates guards in the prisoner mine, and this was such a cool scene because of the way that Kawamatsu popped out of nowhere and truly made his presence known. It's a pretty simple technique, but once again, it comes from a literal frog samurai, so there's no way that it couldn't be cool. And the second and final technique that I want to talk about is called Amanagawa, which translates to River of Sea. In this technique, Kawamatsu jumps above his opponent, holding the blade behind him, then releases a powerful frontward flying slash attack that expands in a circle-shaped pattern horizontally. This attack was first used against Kaido, and it was an attack that was worthy of being used against the King of the Beasts, and I'm pretty sure it had advanced armament haki imbued into it. The Red Scabbards are one of the most underrated groups in the entire One Piece story in my opinion, and Kawamatsu's Kappa style is definitely one of the reasons as to why. And with that, you think that we'd be out of swordsmanship styles to talk about, but there are 2 more that I need to discuss before I can end this thing. One sword style of the flower is a style of single-wielding swordsmanship invented by Hyogoro, and while little is known about the style, the only known attack focuses on speed. Hyogoro himself came in during the prison portion of the Wano arc and really made his presence known, so every time that we get to see him during the raid on Onigashima, you understand his plight and exactly why he's standing by our main characters. Unfortunately, even though Hyogoro is such a likable character, we've only seen one technique from his swordsmanship style, and this technique is called Dohatsu Kohai. In this technique, Hyogoro swings his sword slowly and charges at full speed to slash through multiple enemies while leaving some kind of fire generated by unknown means. We also only got to see this swordsmanship style because of Queen's Ice Oni virus that he unleashed on the Raiders, as it restored Hyogoro to a more youthful body while he was transforming. Hyogoro honestly might have been unstoppable if he was able to fully transform into an Ice Oni, but luckily the goat Chopper came in time to cure him and the rest of the people affected. And finally, we're on to our last swordsmanship style, as Oden 2 sword style is a swordsmanship style developed by Kozuki Oden while dual-wielding his legendary swords, Enma and Ame no Habakiri. In addition to incorporating superhuman strength, it places a particular emphasis on advanced Ryo, providing the user a massive increase in cutting power and strength, elevating their swordsmanship techniques enough that they become able to cut and slash through massive creatures and structures with relative ease and skill. Oden's retainers even used a version of this swordsmanship style in their battle against Kaido, but since they weren't Oden, they weren't able to do any lasting damage. This is the swordsmanship style that gave Kaido his iconic scar, however, so I think it would be wrong not to talk about the technique that gave Kaido that scar, and a bonus one for fun. The first technique that we need to talk about is called Togen Shirataki, which translates to Paradise Waterfall. This is the technique that Oden used to cut the massive mountain god in half, and in this technique, Oden hardens both of his swords using Ryo, and then delivers a diagonal slash with each one of them at the same time. This technique has immense power, range, and precision, as seen when Oden used the technique to bisect the massive mountain god without killing the giant boar or harming the citizens that it had devoured. Now, while I did know that this attack didn't kill the mountain god, somehow, I didn't know that he also saved all the people that he ate with it, and now this is genuinely one of the most impressive feats in the entire series. The Legend of Oden kinda feels like it's written to be super fantastical at times, but if he was pulling stuff like this off, then maybe they weren't so far-fetched after all. And with that, we need to talk about the technique that scarred Kaido, and it's an attack called Togen Totsuka, which translates to Paradise Totsuka. This is Oden's most powerful technique, and after hardening his swords using advanced Ryo, Oden leaps towards his opponent and performs an X-shaped slash. The attack was so powerful that it made the mythical Zoan-enhanced, nigh indestructible Kaido scream in pain, knocked him to the ground, and gave him a massive permanent scar. The moment that Oden uses this attack in the battle against Kaido, it seems like the tides are truly turning, but you know that that can't be the case because you've already seen how Wano turns out to be in the future. With that being said, Kaido's forces had to resort to dirty tactics for the fight not to be drawn out longer than it eventually was, but we all know that Kaido didn't like that things turned out that way, and that's why he killed the old lady. And with that, we discussed every single swordsmanship style that we've gotten the pleasure of seeing so far. Now, just like with a lot of topics that we discussed on this channel already, there's a chance that there are some more styles that I just missed, but you have to remember that this is a really long series, so there's a chance that some things could slip through the cracks. It was a lot of fun to talk about the swordsmanship styles that we talked about today. I wouldn't have made the video if it wasn't. I just wasn't expecting so many different styles that just had a different number of swords associated with them. It doesn't necessarily take away from their creativity since they're all unique in their own ways, but it did make the middle part of this video a little weird to write since we were just going up a single sword or a few swords with each new entry. I'm also 100% sure that we'll be seeing some more swordsmanship styles before the series ends because of how important swordsmen are to the story, so this is definitely a topic that we'll have to revisit sometime in the future. I also plan on making a video about the swordsmen themselves sometime in the future, as they're easily some of the most interesting characters in the entire series, especially the ones that we actually know quite a bit about. With that being said, I'm unfortunately out of things to talk about when it comes to today's video, so I think it's time to end things here. Please join me next time for whatever I post next. Please leave a like and maybe subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye.